So about a week ago, I released a video about Cyclops and how he's a genuinely great representation of disability and the disabled experience. Though during that vid, I also brought up one of the most beloved characters in the entire Marvel catalog, Daredevil. I said I hadn't done much reading on Daredevil, like, in general. And I mentioned how he is one way to handle disabled rep, though I did also say I had some issues with how it seems to be handled at times. But, and this is a big but, that was more so an observation from the outside looking in. Sure, I knew bits and pieces of the character's history, and I will never deny the massive impact he had on the comics landscape. But when I read many of your comments on my video, it made me realize I should give him a shot. Thus, I went to Google and looked up the best place to start reading Daredevil. And that's what I'm here to do today, to give you my analysis of the foundational Daredevil story, The Man Without Fear by Frank Miller and John Romita Jr., and tell you if I think they represented disability well, and if it's just an overall good story. Though I should mention that I don't really have any form of blindness or any prevalent sight disabilities, so if there's special things in here that you relate to or details I wouldn't notice due to my lack of sight disability, let me know. But after all that being said, let's dive right into it. First things first, the writing of the series is peak Frank Miller. If you're a comic fan, you already know his style. Dark, grimy, moody, and incredibly grounded, paired with heavy narration or an internal monologue from a main character. However, it never gets to the point to over-explain the events or the story. Instead, it's kinda like film noir. The narration adds a flavor to the scenes, digging the knife to certain scenes deeper to drive an even bigger impact. It's nice to remember Frank Miller was a really solid writer, because, not gonna lie, the past few decades it seems like he doesn't want to make any books anymore. Look, I mean no disrespect to the man. He's made some of the most important comics of the past 50 to 40 years, but we all know his recent stuff has been a bit, well, it's something. Luckily, none of whatever that he's making now is made its way into this book. The writing is lean, to the point, but is not afraid to have short detours to really flesh out the world and the characters. There's so many moments that happen quickly, but the moments are so well paced that I don't even mind. Like, on paper, having Matt's childhood be reserved to about one issue sounds like you wouldn't have much room for fleshing out the character, but he hits so many beats flawlessly, it sets itself up pretty well. Which, another compliment I want to add to the writing is the sense of cohesion. For writing so stylized, it can be easy to forget details and not bring them back. But it feels like nothing here is forgotten, and if something here isn't paid off, then it feels like that is for a future story to tell. After all, this is meant to be the sort of origin story for the character. But so many things are so well tied together, like how Matt got the name Daredevil. It was the name kids used to call him at school to get under his skin. That's great. It feels a bit out of nowhere until it's shown that his father, Jack Murdoch, was at one point a wrestler named the Red Devil. It makes everything feel so well tied together. Also, I know it's also a different time, but come on, the Red Devil? You can make a better gimmick than that. On another note, all the characters are so striking. There's a way Miller writes these characters with such confidence, not feeling the need to explain everything to you, just showing you how they interact and letting you infer their personalities from there. Like, for example, we don't really know much about Stick's history in this book, but we understand his character pretty well by the end of it. He's a man looking for a proper protege to share in some hidden tradition. What is it? I don't know. But we know it holds some sort of mystical importance. And knowing what I do about Daredevil and Frank Miller, it's ninjas, isn't it? Frank Miller really likes his ninjas, and I don't blame him. Ninjas are pretty cool. I also love that Miller does not pull any punches with his story. Like, the Kingpin is straight up into and does some awful things. He's more or less doing stuff as the Mob Epstein, amongst some other terrible things. And man, when we get to the one scene with Elektra and those thugs in the alleyway, straight out of an 80s slasher film, and that touch after the fact where she writes "I Heart New York" in blood on the wall, I loved that shit. Though I do want to add, I don't think it glorifies any of the violence and any horrible things here. If anything, it makes the setting feel more dangerous and disgusting. There really isn't anything here that's a clean fight or a stylized kung fu set piece. No, fights are fast, bloody, and usually fatal. None of this, of course, would come across without John Romita Jr.'s incredible art. I mean, he is one of my favorite comic artists of all time. If you've seen my J. Michael Straczynski Spider-Man video, which if you haven't, you totally should, I'll link it somewhere on the video and somewhere below, then you'd know how much his art can capture so many different emotions. It's stylized, sure, but generally human and easy to follow, and this book is just yet another example of his artistic mastery. Just look at this moment and how he draws the introduction of the Kingpin. All you get to see are his massive hands coming out of shadow, positioning themselves, and then crack! A newly dead mob boss now lays at the table, but it's all drawn with such fluid motion and easy tracking. capturing this sense of tension within just a few panels, a pair of hands, and some expert shadowing. Plus, let's be real, is there anyone who draws a superhero flying off a building better than him? This is the last panel of the series, and it says it all, man. And this was before he did that iconic panel of Spider-Man. Just look how composed and natural this all feels. Mind you, this is the first panel of the suit in the entire series, but they really make you feel it. Romita Jr. knew he had to go all in on this. And it's gonna be hard to make cooler panels than this for a character, probably ever. Honestly, I don't even mind that they show us the suit. Like, usually I absolutely hate when superhero stories are too afraid to show off their characters' costumes, but here it works. It feels like Matt Murdock hasn't fully committed to who he'll be yet. Thus, he's the scrappy guy just using found materials to hide himself. Personally, it is also a favorite trope of mine for a superhero to have a sort of street outfit before their usual attire. As long as you don't pull something like the X-Men movies and place your characters in boring-ass leather jumpsuits and act like somehow that's cooler, then we'll be good. But I do love the leather jackets from Grant Morrison's new X-Men, actually. What was I talking about? Right, Daredevil. Now, there's one major element that I've barely spoken about so far. That being Matt Murdock, Daredevil, himself. Well, he's a very compelling character here. What I like is that they don't shy away from this deeper dark side that Matt struggles with, especially when younger. He feels isolated and beaten down by the world. And honestly, I understand that feeling. Maybe not to the extremes that he feels it, but I can empathize nonetheless. It almost feels like a Greek myth the way we watch Matt slowly grow into his destined self. The moment where his father strikes him out of anger that drives him to want to study law. Damn, dude, that's some really painful and powerful stuff. I like that Miller doesn't try to get too schmaltzy with the relationship between Matt and Jack, Matt's father, either. They're struggling together, but it's also painted with some real-world issues in there. Again, at one point, Jack hits his own son. Sure, he does immediately regret it, but that doesn't change the fact of what he did. It also doesn't help that Jack's a professional boxer too, so that punch probably hurt like hell. We see the complicated man that Jack is, but also see that he genuinely tries to teach Matt the right lessons, to not follow in his steps. And we see that in Matt. Yet, Matt still has some of his father's vices too. Mainly his deep anger. The moment his father is brutally killed, he goes out of his way to use his abilities to hunt down the men and beat them into an inch of their life. It's a genuine abuse of his abilities, and while it might be emotionally justified, it's still an abuse all the same. Which leads me into talking about Matt's disability itself. I genuinely loved how Miller and Romita Jr. handled it, especially in the first issue. The way Matt is immediately overstimulated by everything around him in the hospital, the agonizing pain and fear of not knowing what's going on, I maybe related to that a bit too much. It made me feel seen to some extent. Honestly, a bit horrified that there are more people than just me that have to experience something like this. But I love that it isn't all bad. The scene with the nun comforting him and making him feel good about his abilities and condition was the right amount of levity needed. I myself can attest that there are genuine people like that in the world who are and willing to help you, even if there are very few. Mine weren't nuns, no, but they were Shriners, so shout out all you Shriners out there. You people do so much genuine good work in the world. The next element of Matt learning to survive in this world is blindness is well handled. I'm so glad that Miller intentionally leaves in a moment of Matt discussing the sense of pity he gets from others. It's seriously one of the worst feelings when someone is pitying you, because they think it comes from a moral place. But it's more that they're placing you into a box. They're helping, sure, but not because you asked for it, but because there's an assumed necessity or a sense that you're fragile. I understand why some would feel that way, but it only makes many feel even more isolated. Which is why the training with Stick matters so much to the story. Now, while I do think Stick can be a bit too harsh and a bit too rigid with his treatment of Matt, I also think there is some toughness needed for one with a disability to form. He teaches Matt to not just fall into the sense of pity, but instead to master and accept himself. It reminded me a lot actually of physical therapy. The way you're pushed to your limit to see how far you can go, to test your body so that you could be healthier and maybe even find treatments in the future. In a sense, Matt is rehabilitating himself and learning to live with his blindness, to live in a world that isn't so welcoming to someone like him, and learning how to combat it if needed. Which, I'll admit, is a very powerful message and definitely changes my tune about Daredevil a lot. Of course, Stick doesn't teach Matt from a completely altruistic place, but the effect of it still matters. I'm glad that they don't flatten Matt down, but instead make him a flawed but good man in a world where being a good man is hard. They don't discount his blindness, but instead make it more something that enriches the character and makes you want to root for him even more. So yeah, I think I like Daredevil now. Maybe even love the character. I definitely see what everyone's talking about. Though, again, this is only my first exposure. I'll probably read more in the future if I don't get caught up on something else. But I really did enjoy what we had here. There's a sort of embodiment of the human spirit to the character, of which I don't think has really been lost in our current era. The Netflix show seems to be pretty beloved, though I think I only watched like an episode or two. Daredevil really is a disabled icon, one who stands triumphantly with his disability, and not in spite of it. And yeah, that's all I really got to talk about on that. I want to add here, I'm really glad that a lot of people in my video were not rude about my opinions on Daredevil, but instead very nice and gentle about it. Seriously, that can go a long way, and there is probably the occasional gatekeepy comment, but I probably either didn't reply to you or I probably said something snarky because, let's be real, gatekeeping is lame like 80% of the time. But I actually do want to read more Daredevil in the future. Maybe not immediately after. Again, I did just read this after all, and while it was really short, there are other videos I want to make and other things I want to read. But I'll probably read it more in the background because I think this is a character worth looking more into. But with all that being said, I'll see you next time.